There's a place in the woods no one talks about. If you ever stumble upon it, just turn back. Don't even think about going in. Trust me, you don't want to know what happens to those who stay. The words of the old man still echoed in my mind, bouncing off the walls of my thoughts like a rock in an empty canyon. I should have listened. I should have turned back, but I didn't. Now, I can never leave. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon to join the journey of discovering the darkest corners of the world. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. I've never been the type to listen to warnings. Ever since I was a kid, I was the one who climbed higher than everyone else on the jungle gym, who dared to touch the hot stove just to see what would happen. Curiosity wasn't just a trait, it was an instinct. The moment I heard about the hidden lagoon, my mind lit up like a flare in the night. People around here called it cursed, a place where the trees were too thick to walk through and the water too still to be natural. The local kids whispered about it like it was something out of an old folk tale, a mystery that no one dared to solve. But that's exactly why I had to find it. My name is Ethan, and I moved to Haydenfield 3 weeks ago. It wasn't exactly my choice. I had a life back in the city, a life I thought was worth living, until it wasn't. My job was a corporate grind, and after the layoff, I ended up in this tiny town, surrounded by more trees than people, with more silence than I ever imagined. Most people might have found that unsettling, but for me it was a chance to breathe, to get away from the chaos, and to leave my mistakes behind. Haydenfield was exactly the kind of town that would either bury you or let you reinvent yourself. I chose the latter. On the outside, I appeared like any other newcomer trying to fit in. I wasn't loud or overbearing, but I wasn't the type to stand in the shadows either. I spent my days at the local diner, talking to the people who were brave enough to strike up a conversation, and my nights wandering the woods. The first time I heard the rumor about the lagoon, I didn't believe it. A hidden paradise, a secluded piece of water where no one ever went. Yeah, sure, sounds too good to be true. But then, I heard the warnings. That's when my curiosity kicked into overdrive. The locals would mutter under their breath, telling me to stay away. It's not a place for strangers, they'd say. Or, it's been there for as long as the town, and no one who's gone in has come back the same. There was always something about their tone, something in their eyes that made me feel like there was more to the story than they were letting on. And, like an idiot, I couldn't resist. The more they warned me, the more I wanted to find it. It was a Saturday afternoon when I finally decided to venture out. The sun was low, dipping behind the mountain range that bordered the town, casting long shadows over the landscape. I figured it would be the perfect time to go. Just enough daylight left to explore, but not too much to make me feel like I was trespassing. I grabbed a water bottle, slipped on my boots, and set off toward the forest. The locals had given me directions, but even with that, I had to fight my way through thick brambles and tangled underbrush. The air was damp, carrying the earthy smell of pine and decay, the kind of smell that only a deep forest could offer. I didn't know what I was expecting. Maybe I thought I'd find something, an ancient ruin or a beautiful stretch of water, untouched by human hands. I didn't expect it to be so quiet. After a half hour of trudging through the woods, I reached the clearing. At first, I thought it was just a pond. The water was unnaturally still, like glass. I stepped closer, my boots squelching in the wet grass, and I looked at the surface. It reflected the sky perfectly. No ripples, no movement, just a perfect mirror of the world above it. But then I noticed the trees surrounding it. They were different from the rest of the forest, older, gnarled, their bark twisted in unnatural patterns, as though they had been shaped by something other than nature. There was a deep, unsettling presence in the air, like the forest itself was holding its breath. I took a deep breath and stepped closer, my hand reaching for the water's edge. That's when I saw it. A sign, barely visible among the branches, was half hidden by vines and moss. The letters were faded, but I could still make out the warning. Enter at your own risk. The water knows. My heart skipped a beat. I could almost hear the word risk echoing in the back of my mind, but curiosity won again. Without a second thought, I slipped off my boots and waded into the water. At first it felt like any other lake. Cool against my skin, refreshing. I moved deeper, letting the water rise to my knees, then my waist. It felt strange. There was no current, no fish, no sign of life in the water. It was like the world had stopped existing here, frozen in time. I swam for a while, just letting the water embrace me, trying to relax. The silence was all-encompassing, oppressive even, but I was too deep into the moment to care. Nothing bad had happened yet. Nothing strange. Then I felt it. A tug. Not like a current, but something pulling at my limbs, urging me toward the middle of the lagoon. I stopped swimming, my instincts kicking in. The tug grew stronger, as though something under the water was guiding me. I tried to fight it, but my body didn't obey. I struggled against the invisible force, my arms and legs working in overdrive, but it was no use. Suddenly, a voice broke through the air. "You shouldn't be here." I spun around, nearly choking on the water. There, standing on the shore, was an old man. He was hunched, his clothes tattered, his eyes dark and heavy with the weight of something unseen. His voice was gravelly, but it carried a deep authority, a warning I couldn't ignore. "Turn back," he said, his gaze piercing into me. "This place, it has rules. You don't want to break them." I tried to speak, to ask him what he meant, but the words caught in my throat. My eyes locked onto his, and for a moment I felt like I was drowning. Not in the water, but in something much worse. "I didn't think I'd find anyone here," I stammered, taking a step back, my feet now firmly planted in the muddy bottom. The old man didn't smile. "That's because no one comes here. No one but those who are foolish enough to ignore the warnings. Leave now, while you still can." And then he turned and vanished into the trees, leaving me with nothing but the deafening silence of the lagoon. But I didn't listen. Of course I didn't. I stayed. The next hour passed in a blur. The tugging sensation never left me. It grew stronger, like the lagoon itself wanted to swallow me whole. But I refused to leave. I couldn't. I needed to know more. As I swam deeper, a new thought crept into my mind. A thought that shouldn't have been there. What would happen if I broke the rules? And in that moment, I knew it wasn't just the water that was watching me. It was the lagoon itself. Would you like to know what happens next? Keep following the story. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the terrifying twists to come. I woke the next morning with a sense of dread hanging over me like a dark cloud. The events of the previous evening replayed in my mind, but I tried to brush them off as a weird dream, something my mind had conjured up in the quiet solitude of Haddonfield's oppressive silence. Yet, as I lay in bed, staring at the peeling ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The water's tug, the strange old man, the eerie warning. There was no denying it. Something wasn't right with that lagoon. I didn't know what, but the sense of foreboding gnawed at me, sharper than ever. Still, I wasn't ready to let it go. I told myself I just needed to get back there, explore more. Maybe the rules weren't so bad. Maybe I just hadn't understood what the old man meant. I needed answers. And answers, to someone like me, were always worth the risk. So, that afternoon, after another uneventful day in Haddonfield, I headed back toward the woods. I didn't tell anyone. The locals had already made it clear that they didn't appreciate outsiders poking around the lagoon. And I wasn't about to let them scare me off. I wasn't the type of person who ran from rumors, especially when those rumors felt like they were hiding something far more intriguing. The journey back to the lagoon felt different. The air was heavier, almost oppressive, and the trees seemed to close in around me as I ventured deeper into the forest. It wasn't the same feeling as before. The quiet tranquility of nature had shifted to something darker. It was as though the forest itself was holding its breath, watching me. But I pressed on, ignoring the prickling sensation on the back of my neck. When I finally reached the clearing, the lagoon was just as I remembered it, calm, serene, its waters like a sheet of glass reflecting the cloudy sky. Yet I noticed something new this time, a presence. It wasn't just the silence, it was something more primal, more ancient. The air felt thick with it. I waded in slowly, testing the waters. The chill of the lagoon seeped through my clothes, but it was a welcome contrast to the stifling heat of the forest. I moved deeper into the water, letting it rise to my chest, and for a moment, everything felt like it had before, peaceful. But then, I felt it, the tug. It was subtle at first, like a soft pull at my limbs, urging me to move toward the center of the lagoon. I hesitated, my heart thumping in my chest. It wasn't the same as before. This felt different, more forceful. I could feel the weight of it, pressing me deeper into the water. I stopped swimming, planting my feet firmly on the muddy bottom, but the pull wouldn't relent. My muscles tensed as the water seemed to hold me there, keeping me from leaving. And then I heard it. The voice. "You're still here, aren't you?" I spun around, my breath catching in my throat. Standing on the shore was the old man again. His appearance hadn't changed, tattered clothes, his eyes dark and distant. But this time, there was something different in his expression, something more urgent. "Why are you still here?" he demanded, his voice sharp and filled with an intensity I hadn't heard before. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. Instead, I just stared at him, feeling the pull of the water grow stronger, almost suffocating. It was as if the lagoon was becoming a part of me, a weight I couldn't escape. "The lagoon doesn't like it when people disobey its rules," the old man continued, his voice softening, though still laced with warning. "You've already broken the first one. Don't think it'll let you go that easily." "Broken what rule?" I asked, my voice shaky. "I don't understand." He took a step forward, his gaze never leaving mine. "You swam alone at dusk," he said, as though the words themselves were a curse. "That's the first rule. Never swim alone at dusk. The lagoon needs balance. It needs to be respected." I shook my head, disbelief flooding my mind. "That's it? You're telling me I'm not supposed to swim alone at sunset? That's ridiculous. What's the harm in that?" The old man sighed deeply, his face shadowed by the darkening sky. "You think it's just a rule? A simple guideline? No. The lagoon has a way of knowing. When you break the rules, it punishes you, and you won't even realize it until it's too late." I scoffed. "Punishes me? How?" The old man didn't respond right away. Instead, he stared at the lagoon as though it were something alive. "The lagoon chooses its own. It's been like this for as long as anyone can remember. Those who break the rules, they don't come back the same. Some never come back at all." His words hit me like a cold splash of water. I tried to laugh it off, to brush off the unease creeping into my chest. But something in his eyes made me stop. He wasn't joking. There was fear in his eyes, fear of something far worse than just a few broken rules. "You don't understand," he said softly, almost to himself. "It's not just the water, it's the lagoon itself. It's ancient. It has its own rules, its own ways of keeping people." I glanced down at the water, its surface still as glass. For a moment, I almost thought I could see something moving beneath the surface, something shifting in the depths. I shivered, my instincts screaming at me to leave. But I couldn't. The curiosity that had driven me here still burned brightly in my chest. "Why does it do that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Why does it have rules?" The old man didn't answer right away. He seemed lost in thought, his eyes narrowed as though he were considering something I couldn't possibly understand. Finally, he spoke. "It's not about the rules," he said. "It's about control. The lagoon keeps what it wants, and once it has you, it never lets go." I didn't know whether to believe him. Part of me wanted to laugh and walk away, dismissing him as an old man who'd lived too long in the woods. But the other part of me, the part that was still swimming in the lagoon's depths, felt a strange pull, an undeniable sensation that the old man was telling the truth. "You need to leave," he said suddenly, his tone urgent, "before it's too late." But before I could respond, the water around me seemed to shift. The pull grew stronger, more intense, like the lagoon was calling me, pulling me deeper into its grasp. I gasped for air, my limbs stiff as though the water had frozen around me. "Leave now," the old man shouted, his voice cracking with desperation, "before it takes you." I tried to push through the water, to swim back toward the shore, but it felt like my body was being dragged under. The water had grown impossibly heavy, pressing down on me as though the lagoon itself were trying to hold me in place. My heart pounded in my chest, and I struggled against the unseen force, my arms flailing wildly. "Please," I shouted, but the words seemed to get lost in the silence. The lagoon's pull was overpowering, and I felt myself sinking deeper, the water closing in around me. I couldn't breathe. My vision blurred, and for a moment, I thought I was going to drown. Then, just as quickly as it had begun, the tug stopped. The water released me, and I was left floating, gasping for air, my heart racing in my chest. I looked up, and the old man was gone. The shore was empty, silent, as though nothing had happened at all. But I knew something had. I knew the lagoon had tested me, and I had failed. I swam back to the shore, my body shaking with a mix of fear and disbelief. As I stumbled onto dry land, my mind raced, replaying the old man's words. The rules, the punishment, what had just happened. I didn't know the answers, but I knew one thing for sure. I was already in too deep. I stood on the edge of the water, my legs trembling, my clothes still wet from the swim. The eerie pull of the lagoon had stopped, but it had left an indelible mark. I wasn't sure what it was, but I felt it. Something pulling me, like invisible strings tied to my bones, dragging me back to the water, back to whatever force controlled this cursed place. I glanced around, half expecting the old man to reappear, his warnings echoing in my mind. But there was no sign of him. No sign of anyone. The clearing was empty, as still and silent as the water itself. Yet, I knew the lagoon wasn't finished with me, not by a long shot. I turned away from the water and began walking, my legs unsteady, my mind in turmoil. Every step I took felt heavier, like I was wading through the thick air itself. It took all my effort to move, but I forced myself to keep going. I had to leave. I had to get away from this cursed place before it consumed me entirely. But as I walked, the trees around me seemed to shift. The path that had been clear before now seemed to close in, the underbrush growing denser, the shadows deeper. My pulse quickened as I realized I had no idea where I was anymore. The clearing, the lagoon, had all started to blur together. It was as if the forest had decided to trap me here, to keep me from leaving. The sense of dread, the gnawing fear, was back. Stronger this time. I stumbled over a root, my foot catching on it, sending me crashing to the ground. The impact knocked the wind out of me, but as I pushed myself up, I saw something in the distance. A figure. At first, I thought it was the old man again, but this figure was different. Taller, more imposing. My heart skipped a beat. It was standing in the distance, just outside the clearing, barely visible through the trees. I tried to call out, but my voice caught in my throat. I didn't know why I was so afraid of this figure. I couldn't explain it. I could only feel the fear, the urge to run, but I couldn't. My legs refused to move. I was frozen in place. The figure stepped forward, its form becoming clearer as it moved closer. It wasn't the old man. It was something else. It was tall and thin, with long, spindly arms that stretched unnaturally. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and its face, if you could even call it a face, was a smooth, featureless mask. I couldn't see eyes, a nose, or a mouth, just blank, empty skin. I gasped, stumbling backward, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. My mind screamed at me to run, to get away, but my body wouldn't obey. The figure kept moving toward me, its footsteps unnervingly quiet. It was as though the very earth itself was swallowing up the sound of its presence. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. Suddenly, it stopped, just a few feet away from me. The air around us grew cold, the temperature dropping rapidly, sending a chill through my bones. I could see my breath, rising in small, misty clouds. It was there, watching me, and I realized in that moment that I had made a grave mistake by staying too long. I had disobeyed the lagoon's rules, and now it was going to take its price. I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. The figure just stood there, its presence suffocating. It was like it was waiting for me to understand something, waiting for me to accept that I had already crossed a line I couldn't come back from. It slowly raised one arm, and I watched in horror as its fingers elongated, twisting and curling like a snake preparing to strike. The figure didn't speak. It didn't need to. Its intentions were clear. I closed my eyes, feeling the icy grip of terror wrap around my chest. In that moment, I realized the lagoon wasn't just a place. It wasn't just water and trees. It was a living, breathing entity, and I had broken its rules. But then, just as quickly as the figure had appeared, it was gone. The air warmed again, the fog of fear lifting just as swiftly as it had descended. My legs were shaking, my heart thudding so loudly I was sure it would burst from my chest. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. I just stood there, too terrified to do anything. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. Eventually, my body regained its control, and I stumbled to my feet, my heart still racing in my chest. My mind was in chaos, unable to process what had just happened. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I forced myself to move, to walk away from the clearing, from the lagoon, from whatever horrors lay within its depths. My feet carried me forward, one step at a time, each one harder than the last. But as I walked, I realized something. The figure wasn't gone. It hadn't left me. It was still with me, its presence lingering just at the edge of my consciousness, watching, waiting. I forced myself to move, to walk away from the clearing, from the lagoon, from whatever horrors lay within its depths. My feet carried me forward, one step at a time, each one harder than the last. But as I walked, I realized something. The figure wasn't gone. It hadn't left me. It was still with me, its presence lingering just at the edge of my consciousness, watching, waiting. I didn't know what it wanted or why it had come to me, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't safe. Not anymore. Not after what I had done. It wasn't until I finally reached the edge of the forest, panting and drenched in sweat, that I dared to look back. The lagoon was still there, silent and still, its waters reflecting the gray sky above. But I could feel it. I could feel the pull again, the tug, deep within my chest calling me back. I didn't stop to think. I turned and ran, not stopping until I was far away from the forest, from the lagoon, from whatever cursed power had taken hold of me. But even then, the pull didn't stop. It lingered, a cold presence in the pit of my stomach. And there you have it, just a taste of the horror that lies in the depths of the lagoon. But the question is, what happens next? Will the rules finally be revealed, or will they drag our protagonist even deeper into its cursed waters? We can't say for sure, but you'll want to stay tuned to find out. If you enjoyed the story, hit that like button. And if you want to dive even deeper into the dark corners of horror, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss an update. Have you ever encountered something you couldn't explain? Drop your thoughts or theories in the comments below. I love hearing from you. Until next time, stay cautious, stay curious, but most of all, stay safe.